Only in America.
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 This week, part 2 on the South Carolina churches that are getting a helping hand from refugees in Greece.
Their first response has been to be very humbled, to think that these people would love them back in the only way they knew how.
It's a humbling thing for us. And to know that, first of all, there are people who are in desperate situation that actually will think about us. In America, that people have so much in it. It's a land of plenty. But yet, there are people who had nothing, literally nothing, had lost everything. Not only possessions, but relationships and homes and, cultures and societies and those kind of things. And yet they think about us. It's a humbling experience. That they're not just takers, they're also givers.
From the National Immigration Forum, I'm Ali Nirani, and this is Only in America. Last month, the UN High Commissioner for Refugees reported that the number of forcibly displaced people in the world has increased to nearly 80 million. That's more than the entire population of the UK or France. More than 30 million of those displaced are children. As the UNHCR points out, that's more than the entire populations of Australia, Denmark, and Mongolia combined. And just as we face the worst refugee crisis since World War II, the Trump administration has lowered America's refugee caps and severely restricted asylum. They have made it clear that they're not interested in an immigration system that protects people fleeing violence or persecution at home. But even in the face of these obstacles, refugees are still stepping up to help others in need. Last week, I spoke to Zoe Pappas Schultz. She's the co-founder of When We Band Together, an organization that provides community centers and safe spaces for refugees. Zoe works extensively with the Moria refugee camp in Lesbos, Greece. Most headlines about Moria draw attention to the camp's overcrowding and unsanitary conditions, issues that are intensified amid a global pandemic. But that's not the story to emerge from Moria in the wake of COVID-19. As Zoe explained to me last week, when news of the pandemic spread, refugee volunteers at the camp created masks for all 20,000 residents. But they did not stop there. The refugees continued to make more masks for people in need around the world. You can hear more of their story by catching up on last week's episode. And, as we'll hear today, some of those masks ended up in an unlikely place: Baptist churches in South Carolina.
Support for the National Immigration Forum comes from the Carnegie Corporation of New York, supporting innovations in education, democratic engagement, and strengthening international peace and security. And from Humanity United. When humanity is united, we can bring a powerful force for human dignity.
This week, we're hearing from 2 South Carolinians who are distributing the refugee-made masks to churches and other organizations across the region. Robbie McAlister is a former pastor who was moved to action after serving in Moria in 2015. Robbie now works with us at the Forum as a Southeast mobilizer for Bibles, Badges, and Business for Immigration Reform. David Lee is a missionary of the North American Mission Board's Ministry Evangelism team. He serves as director of lay mobilization at the Lexington Baptist Association. After hearing about the mask project at Moria, Robbie connected those on the ground in Greece to David's network of South Carolina churches. The pair have been working to distribute around 2,000 masks to their communities. Elevating purpose and presence of the refugee community to South Carolinians has fostered a spirit of community, they told me. And they're optimistic that the project will ultimately lead to greater understanding and support for people seeking refuge around the world. So, David, let's start with you. Tell me a little about yourself. How do you kind of find yourself where you are today? Where'd you grow up?
I was born and raised in Hong Kong. When I was about 12 years old, I came to know the Lord. And then when I was 17 years old, I realized that not being a very good student, I wouldn't have any opportunity to further my education. And so I was still in high school at the time. I ended up uprooting myself and came to America. So I was a junior in high school. I ended up in Texas. And so I stayed there for high school, for college, for grad school. And then I went into seminary and then into ministry. And so, yes, it's been quite a journey. And I didn't really know anybody. I didn't speak the language. I didn't know the culture. Didn't have any friends. Lost all my friends. So I think out of that experience, I fully do embrace the fact that even though I wasn't persecuted, my life wasn't in danger, that I have chosen to better myself and opportunity for education. It's still a difficult transition. So I can imagine those who has been uprooted from their family and they can't even go back, and they came out of a situation where literally their life is in danger and their family members already been either persecuted, imprisoned, or killed. So my journey, comparatively speaking, has been much, much better than today's immigrants.
And where do you live now, David?
I live in South Carolina, Columbia, South Carolina.
And Robbie, what about you? Tell me a little about yourself.
Well, I'm a native South Carolinian. I grew up in South Carolina. I went to university here and studied engineering, worked as an engineer for 10 years. And while I was doing my engineering work, I actually helped plant a church in Columbia, South Carolina. And as part of that, the church grew, and I decided 10 years in that I would change careers. I went back to grad school and became a pastor, and then served for 10 years as a missionary in the former Soviet Union, and returned 15 years ago when our kids were entering college, got involved in ministry again, and then 3 years ago, through a trip to Europe to survey the refugee highway in Europe and what was happening from 2015 forward, God just really captured my heart with trying to serve and help and love some of the most vulnerable people on the earth. And so that's where I am today.
So tell me some of these experiences for both of you as you visited refugee camps and shelters in other countries. What were those experiences like? Why did you take those trips? What surprised you?
Well, like I said, in 2015, as the world began to watch what was happening in Syria and Afghanistan, largely Central Asia, the Middle East, North Africa, there was a lot of migration going on because of violence, terror, war, famine. And over that period of time, close to 3 million refugees flooded into Europe, and about a third of them came through the islands off the coast of Turkey into Greece. And so when we ended up going to Lesbos Island and serving in Moria Camp, which is on Lesbos, it was amazing to, first of all, see the tragedy that was happening in the lives of these families, and many, many children, wives with, young children who had lost their husbands on the journey or through their husband being killed. And so it just really captured my heart that these people, were important to God. And so it just changed the course of my whole life. I came back home and basically resigned my work as a pastor and decided that I wanted to spend the rest of my life, as the Lord would lead, serving these people, because the Bible says very clearly that God loves the whole world, but he has a special place in his heart for the orphan, the widow, the poor, and those who are sojourners. And so there's no question that the refugees are sojourners. And that just really captured my heart.
And for me, this is David, my journey has been the fact that obviously none of us could turn a blind eye towards what's happening in the world. And for those of us who are indeed claim to be followers of Jesus, there's another call within all of us to to be God and to be loving, and to be a part of the solution for what's happening in the world. But most of us really didn't know how to go about it and how we can be connected to this crisis. So Robbie has been very instrumental. And I think that's, through his work and his ministry and his passion that most of us got connected. And so that was such a blessing, because I work with a network of about 77 churches here in the local area. And then having worked at the South Carolina Baptist Convention for some years, there are, literally 2,200 churches within our state. And that's just in our state alone. And these are just Baptist churches. And so I know that we can be mobilized. Perhaps we could make some difference in alleviating some of the human sufferings.
So a few years ago, I was in Spartanburg, and I met with the folks at, I think it was First Baptist Church in Spartanburg, and I learned about, the refugee work that they were doing overseas, but also in Spartanburg, and it was so inspiring. But these days, refugee resettlement, refugee care, relief, even overseas, is in the context of this global pandemic, COVID-19. So, from the congregations you're working with across the state, David, or Robbie, in your case as well, how are people grappling with responding to kind of how these two issues are connected, or do people kind of see them as very different? But, how does COVID-19, how is it impacting people's understanding of immigrants and refugees?
I don't see a connection between those two until you introduce the mask project. For those of us who had been in refugee camps and working and ministering and loving on our personal concerns, there's always a fear that there will be an outbreak within the refugee camps. But for those, I think most of our churches, most of our people in the community, we're really concerned with our own survival, our own economy, our own health, But for those of us, like I said, who've been a part of the refugee relief, we are all very concerned and watching, and praying that there would not be an outbreak in the refugee camps.
So then you bring this up, David, in terms of these masks. And so the story, last week's episode, we heard from Zoe Pappas-Schultz, who is with an organization out of Lesvos called When We Band Together. And they produced, the refugees that they work with in Lesvos sewed masks, and they were delivered to South Carolina. So Robbie, if you don't mind, kind of walk me through, what this has been like to connect with Zoe and her colleagues, but kind of understanding, okay, where the masks are coming from. And then what were the initial conversations like with your colleagues and friends in South Carolina in terms of kind of introducing this idea of masks made by refugees to help people kind of serve their self-interest, as David was saying?
Well, I think it was nothing short of overwhelming, especially for the people that have been working with the refugees, to think that these precious, vulnerable people who really have nothing would have in their heart the idea of giving back, whatever they could, which in their case, and I think it's important for people to know that these refugees are volunteering their time to make these masks. They're not being paid. And they actually initiated it. My understanding was that they made the mask initially for the people in the camp. And then when they finished, they said, well, let us not stop now. Let's continue to make these masks and spread them around so that we can help mitigate the COVID problem. And as I've shared that with people that have sent teams over to Moria, their first response has been to be very humbled, to think that these people would love them back in the only way they knew how. And so it's just been an extremely positive way of showing the world, actually, that we are a global community and we are somewhat interdependent on one another and we can help one another. And so it's just been very inspiring and very encouraging from top to bottom.
One of the thoughts that I have when particularly when we were in ministering to them in the refugee camps is, at the moment, some of their basic needs are being taken care of, not the best, but at least they are out of danger, and then they share some of our personal concerns, share with us and said, no, this is not exactly, where we want to end up, but at least I'm not hearing bombs dropping on my family, through the night and not knowing we're going to see daylight. But my thoughts always turn to the fact that, okay, the physical needs, some of them are being met. Perhaps some of the safety needs are being met. What about finding purpose and making a contribution? And many of them came from communities and families that some of them make great contributions. They were participating members of the society and in their community and the economy. And now there's no purpose. So the hardest part for them to sit around and wait is finding purpose. And I think this mask gives to the United States not only to meet a genuine need to help us deal with the pandemic, but just finding purpose and making a difference from where they are. It's just a tremendous testimony.
It's an amazing point, David. I'd never thought about it that way. And as you have distributed the masks, through your network of churches, what has the reaction been like?
Well, I know that for me, and when I distributed the mask in our church and the churches around the community, people have been, first of all, again, overwhelmed and very humbled by that, but they've been very thankful. And to be honest, I think it's helped them understand the value of people in other places. I think we live in a time where, people are just afraid of anybody that's different from themselves. And I think it's just another way of trying to help people understand that, we can live together in harmony and peace and work together and help one another. And so I feel like that's really happening in our South Carolina churches that are becoming a part of this mass project, not to mention the fact that it's allowing churches to, help people protect themselves from the virus.
I think Robbie is right in that, it is that human spirit of receiving. It really it's a humbling thing for us. And to know that, first of all, there are people who are in desperate situation that actually will think about us. In America, that people have so much, and it's a land of plenty. But yet there are people who had nothing, literally nothing, had lost everything. Not only possessions, but relationships and homes and, cultures and societies and those kind of things. And yet they think about us. It's a humbling experience that they're not just takers, they're also givers.
I keep going back to this, the importance of purpose and what that means to all of us, right? And that all of us have a purpose. Do you think that as the masks have worked their way through the community in South Carolina, that they've developed an understanding of kind of what does it mean to have purpose, even for those who are refugees and who are trying to, seek safety?
I think that's a good question. I think I would agree with David in terms of the people that are in the refugee camps. I've met PhDs that are fluent in 5 languages living in a tent next to a pile of trash. And I've met, people that were leaders in their country that, and one of the groups that really affected me the most were the people that translated for our military who were in Afghanistan or Iraq. And they were kind of left behind. And then they end up in a refugee camp because their families have been targeted, for execution because of collaborating with the enemy, quote unquote. And you meet these people and they are high capacity individuals that, to be quite honest, in a refugee camp have very little to do. And so I know from the refugee side, I agree with David. I just wish there was a way that, a lot of their capacity was not just sitting on the sidelines, in a camp. That process could be expedited more effectively and efficiently, and these people could be assimilated and, put to work. They want to do it. They have things to contribute. And I think the same is true here in our country. I think when people see that people are industrious and they are wanting to contribute, it's inspiring to us. It makes us want to work harder. It makes us want to contribute more. And hopefully not only economically and those ways, but also contribute more, loving one another, caring for one another, being a community together, and just making a world a better place, spreading the love around, so to speak.
I'm really hoping that and thankful for what you're doing in terms of the mask projects, is perhaps to help those of us in the United States, and particularly those in our churches, to begin to gain some understanding, perhaps looking at the world's refugees in a very different light. The fact that they actually are yearning, there's a human yearning to give purpose to make a difference. No matter what your situation, your circumstances is, that we want to be recognized, that our God-given abilities, and however much or however little that we have access at the time, that want to be used to make a difference. And so my prayer is that as our church members, whether they're receiving this mask, actually putting them on or not, whether they need it or not, just the fact that it's been there, has been recognized, I think that alone is going to make a statement.
Yeah, so, last week, the UN High Commissioner of Refugees released their annual data on the number of people forcibly displaced. And the number is now nearly 80 million people have been forcibly displaced. This includes 30 to 34 million children. So, from my perspective, I just think that this challenge in terms of, refugees fleeing their situation, seeking to be resettled, is just going to grow and grow in the years ahead, particularly because of, the poverty that is being caused by COVID-19. So what do you, from this project and this kind of delivery of masks from refugees in Lesbos, what do you hope that, congregations take away from this experience? But I think more importantly, because we've talked about that, but more importantly, what do you hope that, congregants and pastors do moving forward?
Well, I would say that, South Carolina is a small state, but we're one of those states currently that's kind of on the fence when it comes to refugee resettlement. And one thing that we found doing work in Lesbos is the people that have gone have always come back. I mean, to the person, we've taken close to 300 people over in the last 4 years. And to the person, they have come back with a different understanding of who refugees are. They've seen it. They're just people like themselves that are looking to make a better life for themselves and to contribute. They come back, to be really honest, most of the refugees that are in Moria camp are of the Muslim faith, and they come back with a better perspective and a better understanding of Islam and the Muslims. And then they come back with a heart to reach out and not be afraid of ethnic communities, even in our own backyards, who are refugees and immigrants. And so, we're hoping, one person at a time, one leader at a time, one congregation at a time, there'll be a change in perspective, and there'll be a receptive spirit to refugee resettlement in our state, and even more so around the country.
And David, what do you think? What would you like to see happen moving forward?
I'm very much on the same page with Robbie when it comes to that, because for where God has planted us here in South Carolina, this is where we need to, and people like Robbie and myself that want to see a change, want to see a transformation in terms of attitude, in terms of a call, in terms of a passion. How can we turn how can we turn and not look at the 80 million people who have been displaced, and over half of them are children. And so, here in the conservative southern states, we always talk about the unborn child. We got 40 million plus born children all over the world has been displaced. And so I think having taken them, and for those who are willing to go and perhaps even seeing pictures of them, well, we couldn't take pictures, but even on the media, that they're looking in their eyes basically, and to say how hypocritical for us to be saying, oh, we protect the life of unborn child. We even vote politically for candidates who said they protect the life of unborn children, and then we turn around and turn blind eyes on the 40, 50 million, perhaps even more, on the displaced children in the world. And so I'm very much agree with Robbie, and I pray that as we enter into these types of experiences, that perhaps some of us will change our mind about the landscape of what refugee work is like.
Yeah, I remember the trip that I did to Spartanburg, and they were talking, just like you were saying, Robbie, about the congregants, the folks from the community you would take to Lesbos or to another camp. And in this case, through these masks, the refugee community in Lesbos is coming to South Carolina, not physically, but through their work, through their contribution.
Yes.
And like you said, David, through their purpose.
Mm-hmm.
It just makes it all so much more tangible.
That's right.
Absolutely.
So I don't know. I've got so many more questions. So I feel but it's a 25-minute podcast, so we're gonna have to bring it to a close. So I have one last question for both of you, and the question is, or the request, if you will, is just to finish this sentence, and the sentence begins "Only in America." So only in America. ... So whichever one of you would like to go first.
What do you mean by that? In terms of refugee work, is that what you're talking about, or
however you want to finish the sentence? Only in America. ... Like only in America can you get great barbecue in a place like South Carolina.
Exactly. Well, Texas.
Uh-oh.
I know.
Different podcast, David. Different podcast.
That's right. That would be a fight over who has the real barbecue, right?
Well, I'll begin. I would say only in America do we have the opportunity, the freedom, the history, the capacity to reach out and serve and love vulnerable people like we're talking about in refugee camps around the world. With the resources that we have, we feel like God has blessed us tremendously as a nation. And the Bible says very clearly that God blesses us so that all the ends of the earth will fear him. And so in my thinking, we have been blessed to be a blessing. We haven't been blessed because there's anything ultra special about us as a country. I think God has put a stewardship in our hands, and it involves blessing others, and that includes refugees around the world.
Thank you, Ron. Go ahead, David. Yeah.
And to me, is that only in America that not only we have the opportunity to send forth and be missional as we leave America, and that we became really a mission base, and that we go forth in the mission base and go into all of the countries and be missional. But only in America that actually God is also bringing the mission field to America. And so from refugee resettlement to immigration work, to people that even came out of desperation, that it might not be documented, but they're here in our community and providing services and being a consumer, contributing to the economy, that we have an opportunity to reach them. And then not to mention all the colleges and universities. And I used to serve in Boston. And so, at any given time, I would be told that 25% of the world's leader will be studying in the northeast corner of the United States of America. What an opportunity that we have, that God has brought the mission field here also to America.
David Lee, Robbie McAlister, thank you so much for joining the conversation, but much more importantly, thank you so much for everything that you're doing in South Carolina. And when this pandemic finally eases, I am looking forward to visiting you all down there. So again, thank you.
Thank you, Ali, for having us, and thank you for the work you all do as well.
Absolutely. God bless.
Robbie McAlister is the Southeast Mobilizer for Bibles, Badges, and Business for Immigration Reform. David Lee is the Director of Lay Mobilization at Lexington Baptist Association. You can find more about Robbie and David at our website, immigrationforum.org/podcast. And while you're there, make sure to tune in to last week's conversation with Zoe if you haven't heard it already. Next up, stay tuned to Only in America in the coming weeks as we take a closer look at the threats to legal immigration. If you like what you hear, subscribe to Only in America on Apple Podcasts, and please share it with a friend. Only in America is produced and edited by Joanna Taylor, Megan Wetmore, and Becca Wall. Our artwork and graphics are designed by Carla Leha. I'm Ali Nirani, and I will talk to you next week.